All right, so we're diving into some pretty big news
Yeah.
coming out of CNN Politics from January 24th, 2025.
Okay.
It feels like Trump's new administration has already
It's been a busy few weeks.
squeezed a month's worth of activity into just these few short weeks,
For sure.
from controversial cabinet confirmations to potential international conflicts. We've got a
Well,
lot to unpack, and lucky for us, we've got an expert here
happy to be here.
to help us make sense of it all. So, what are the biggest takeaways from this news, and what should our listeners really be paying attention to?
Well, I think what strikes me is how assertive this administration is right out of the gate.
Yeah.
We're seeing major policy shifts, disaster responses with a twist, and a clear pattern of challenging the status quo, both domestically and internationally. It's
A lot to process.
there's a lot to process, for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, let's start with P Hex's confirmation
Okay.
as defense secretary. This was a nail-biter, decided by a single vote
Down to the wire.
from Vice President JD Vance. It's only the second time in history a VP has had to break a tie
Wow.
for a cabinet nominee, which really underscores the controversy surrounding this pick.
Yeah.
Do you think this close vote signals a potential crack in party unity?
It's definitely something to watch closely.
Okay.
Remember, 3 Republican senators,
Mhm.
including Mitch McConnell, voted against Hegseth. And McConnell's statement wasn't just a disagreement.
It was strong.
It was a scathing critique of Hegseth's qualifications and ability to handle national security threats.
Yeah.
This level of dissent within the Republican Party this early on could be a sign of things to come.
And it's interesting how Trump is already celebrating this win,
Oh, yeah.
even dismissing McConnell's concerns.
Yeah, he's really focused on...
It seems like
Right.
he's prioritizing loyalty and a winner-takes-all mentality over potential concerns about experience or unity.
experience and unity.
This could set the tone for his entire administration, don't you think?
I agree. Yeah. It's a pattern we saw during his previous presidency.
Yeah,
And it seems to be re-emerging here.
definitely.
It raises questions about how he'll handle future challenges.
Right.
And whether he'll be open to different perspectives.
Okay, let's shift gears
Sure.
to Trump's response to the recent natural disasters.
Okay.
He visited both California, which was hit by wildfires, and North Carolina, which was dealing with Hurricane Helene's aftermath.
Right.
On the surface, it looks like the classic presidential move of showing concern and leadership, but there's a deeper layer to this, isn't there?
Right.
Yeah.
His visit to California to survey the wildfire damage is a stark contrast to his past criticisms of the state's wildfire response.
Right.
Now he's pledging to work with Governor Newsom on recovery efforts and even called the damage unbelievable.
I saw that.
But then, in North Carolina, he threatens to use federal aid to California
Oh, wow.
as leverage for political concessions.
Well,
It almost feels like he's trying to use these disasters to further his own agenda.
it definitely raises questions about his motives and whether he's truly prioritizing the needs of those affected by these disasters.
Oh, yeah.
This kind of political maneuvering could have real-world consequences
Absolutely.
for people who are struggling to rebuild their lives.
Yeah, it's
Do you see this pattern emerging in any of the other news from this week?
absolutely. The State Department halting passport applications with an X gender marker
Oh, right.
aligns with Trump's executive order recognizing only male and female sexes.
Okay.
This move reverses a Biden-era policy and signals a return to a more traditional view of gender.
Yeah.
But this isn't just a symbolic change. It has real consequences for transgender and non-binary individuals who are now facing more obstacles in their daily lives.
It seems like a very deliberate attempt to push a specific social agenda,
It does seem that way.
even if it means alienating or harming certain groups.
Yeah.
And then there's the State Department's decision to freeze almost all foreign assistance except for emergency food aid
Right.
and military financing to Israel and Egypt.
Yeah, that was a...
What kind of global impact do you think this will have?
This is a major policy shift
Yeah.
that's already sending shockwaves to the international community.
Wow.
It raises questions about the U.S.'s commitment to global development and humanitarian aid. This sudden halt could destabilize regions that rely on U.S. assistance
Right.
and potentially worsen existing crises around the world.
It's a bold move with potentially far-reaching consequences.
It is.
And there's a similar boldness in the way the administration is handling communication.
Yeah.
They're testing a system to mass email federal employees. And the Pentagon has paused almost all social media activity except for posts related to the southern border.
Oh, interesting.
Is this about controlling the narrative and managing public perception?
It certainly appears that way.
Yeah.
It suggests a desire to bypass traditional media channels
Mm-hmm.
and communicate directly with government employees and the public,
Yeah.
which could allow them to shape the narrative and promote their agenda without much scrutiny or pushback.
It's definitely something we need to keep an eye on as
Right.
the administration continues to solidify its communication strategies. And speaking of shaping narratives, the administration is taking a pretty aggressive stance on immigration.
Yeah, it seems so.
They're not yeah.
Yeah, tell me more.
Okay.
Okay. They're requesting state and local governments to help enforce federal immigration laws,
Oh, okay.
citing a mass influx of migrants at the border.
Mm-hmm.
It expands existing programs and gives the Department of Homeland Security broader authority to deputize local law enforcement
Wow.
for immigration enforcement. This is a significant escalation
Yeah.
that raises concerns about potential overreach and racial profiling.
It definitely feels like a move designed to make a statement and send a message,
Absolutely.
both domestically and internationally.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what other policies they might be considering to restrict immigration and tighten border security.
And speaking of making statements,
Yeah.
let's talk about what's happening on the international stage,
Yeah.
specifically with Russia and Ukraine.
Right.
President Zelensky has accused Putin of trying to manipulate Trump to achieve his goals,
Wow.
even suggesting Putin is trying to sow discord
Mm-hmm.
and undermine Western support for Ukraine.
That's a pretty serious accusation.
It is.
What makes Zelensky think that Putin is trying to pull strings like that?
Well, Putin recently stated that the Ukraine crisis could have been avoided if Trump had been in power
Oh, really?
back in 2022. He even called Trump a smart person and said he was willing to talk with him about the conflict.
So he's
It almost sounds like he's trying to appeal to Trump's ego and create a wedge with the U.S. and its allies.
That's a pretty savvy move on Putin's part,
It seems so.
especially considering Trump's past praise of Putin
Right.
and his skepticism of U.S. involvement in Ukraine.
Exactly.
It puts Trump in a tricky position, doesn't it?
It does.
How can he balance his desire for a negotiated settlement
Yeah.
with the need to maintain U.S. credibility and support for Ukraine?
It's a delicate balancing act,
Yeah.
and his actions will be closely scrutinized by both domestic and international audiences.
Of course.
His stance on this issue could have ripple effects on global politics and the future of the conflict.
It definitely feels like a high-stakes situation. It is, with the potential for miscalculation on either side.
Yeah.
And it's not the only potential international headache for the new administration.
Right.
Secretary of State Rubio recently had his first conversation with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. What can we glean from that interaction?
The U.S. readout emphasizes Rubio's focus on U.S. interests
Okay.
and concerns over China's actions toward Taiwan and in the South China Sea.
Right.
It's a very assertive tone that suggests the administration is taking a hard line on China.
It almost sounds like they're drawing a line in the sand and
Yeah.
saying, we're not going to back down. Do you think this could escalate tensions between the two superpowers?
It's certainly possible.
Yeah.
The Chinese readout, on the other hand, highlights the need for mutual respect, cooperation,
Okay.
and finding a way for the two countries to coexist peacefully.
Interesting.
It's a more conciliatory tone
Yeah.
that suggests a willingness to find common ground.
It sounds like they're trying to de-escalate the situation,
It does.
while the U.S. is taking a more confrontational approach.
Right.
This difference in tone could make it difficult to find a path forward.
It's definitely something to watch closely.
Yeah.
The relationship between the U.S. and China is arguably the most important bilateral relationship in the world.
For sure.
How they manage their differences in areas of competition will have a huge impact
Huge impact.
on the global economy and security.
Shifting back to the domestic front,
Okay.
the Trump administration has already made its presence known at the Supreme Court.
How so?
They're asking for a pause on 4 appeals left over from the Biden administration, including one challenging California's strict vehicle emission rules.
Interesting.
It seems they're wasting no time in trying to undo Biden's legacy.
It's a clear indication that they intend to use the judiciary
Yeah.
to advance their agenda and potentially reshape the legal landscape on key issues
Like what?
like environmental regulation, immigration, and social policy.
It's a reminder that the Supreme Court plays a crucial role
Huge role.
in shaping American society.
For sure.
And its decisions can have far-reaching consequences for decades to come.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this early move by the Trump administration suggests that the Supreme Court will once again be a battleground for some of the most contentious issues facing the nation.
Right.
What happens with these appeals and future nominations to the court could have a profound impact on the direction of the country.
Speaking of potential setbacks,
Yeah.
we can't overlook what's happening at the National Institutes of Health,
Okay.
the NIH. The communications pause instituted by the Trump administration seems to have backfired
Oh, how so?
with unintended consequences for scientific research.
Yes. This attempt to control messaging and prevent leaks has inadvertently created a bureaucratic nightmare.
And a nightmare.
Scientists at the NIH have been told they can't purchase any supplies,
Really?
including essential materials for ongoing studies.
So researchers are literally unable to do their jobs because of this policy.
That's right.
It seems like a classic example of a well-intentioned idea going awry.
It does.
What kind of impact is this having on the NIH's ability to conduct vital research?
The impact is significant and far-reaching.
Like,
We're talking about essential medications for clinical trials, animal feed liquid nitrogen for preserving samples.
oh, wow.
All sorts of crucial materials are now unavailable.
Yeah.
The longer this continues,
Right.
the more damage it will do to the progress of scientific research.
It makes you wonder if the administration fully considered the potential consequences before implementing this pause.
It highlights the importance of carefully thinking through the implications of any policy,
Yeah.
no matter how well-intentioned it may be.
Yeah.
In this case, the desire to control the narrative
Right.
has inadvertently hampered scientific progress and potentially jeopardized important research
Yeah.
that could benefit public health.
It seems there's a pattern emerging here, a rush to implement sweeping changes
It seems
without fully considering the potential consequences
Yeah.
or seeking diverse perspectives.
It's a theme that runs through many of the news stories we've discussed today,
Yeah.
from cabinet appointments to foreign policy decisions to domestic policy changes.
Yeah.
It raises questions about the administration's decision-making process and its ability to govern effectively.
It's been a whirlwind of a week, hasn't it?
It really has.
From cabinet confirmations and natural disasters
Yes.
to international tensions and policy shakeups. It feels like we've covered a year's worth of news in just one episode.
A lot going on.
What are your main takeaways from all of this?
So many.
What should our listener be focusing on as we move forward?
Well, I think one thing that stands out is this administration's assertive,
Yeah.
and some might say impulsive, approach to governing.
Right.
They're not shying away from controversy or conflict, whether it's pushing through a contentious cabinet pick like Hegseth,
Right.
challenging China on the world stage, or using federal aid as a bargaining chip.
Yeah,
It's a very decisive leadership style,
it is.
but it remains to be seen whether it will be effective in the long run.
And there's a clear pattern of prioritizing control
Definitely.
and managing the narrative.
Yeah.
The communications pause at the NIH, the crackdown on immigration,
Right.
the attempt to mass email federal employees. It all points to a desire to tightly control the flow of information
Absolutely.
and shape public perception.
Yeah.
Do you think this approach is sustainable in the long term?
That's a good question.
Or could it backfire?
It might work in the short term to control the message and project an image of strength and decisiveness.
Right.
But over time, this lack of transparency and open communication could erode trust
Yeah.
and make it harder to address complex challenges effectively,
Of course.
especially when you consider the potential for unintended consequences,
Yeah.
like we saw with the NIH situation.
Exactly. And it's not just about communication.
Right.
It's about the potential consequences of these policies.
Yeah.
The freeze on foreign aid, the immigration crackdown, the rollback of environmental regulations. These actions could have ripple effects,
Absolutely.
both domestically and internationally. How do you see these early moves playing out in the bigger picture?
It's still early, but we're already seeing signs of potential instability and conflict.
Yeah.
The situation with Russia and Ukraine is delicate.
Yeah.
The relationship with China is increasingly strained.
Right.
And there's growing concern about the impact of these policies on vulnerable populations, both at home and abroad. It's crucial for your listeners to pay close attention to how these situations develop
Right.
and to consider the potential long-term consequences of these early decisions.
So what can our listener do to stay informed and engaged amidst this whirlwind of activity?
Yeah.
What are the key things they should be watching for in the coming weeks and months?
I think it's important to look beyond the headlines
Yeah.
and really dig into the details of these policies and their potential impacts.
Okay.
Pay attention to how different groups are affected,
Hmm.
both domestically and internationally.
Right.
Look for signs of unintended consequences and how the administration responds to challenges and criticism.
Yeah.
And perhaps most importantly, don't be afraid to ask questions and engage in thoughtful discussions about the direction of the country.
It's a call to action for all of us to stay informed, engaged, and to think critically about the decisions being made by those in power.
Absolutely.
It's going to be a fascinating
Yeah.
and no doubt turbulent journey over the next 4 years.
I agree.
Thanks for helping us navigate these complex issues and for sharing your insights.
My pleasure. And remember, the future isn't written yet.
Right.
It's up to all of us to shape it.
Well said. And thank you, dear listener, for joining us on this deep dive into the news. We'll be back soon with more insightful analysis and thought-provoking discussions. Until then, stay curious and keep questioning.